I stepped into the dining room, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach the moment I saw them all gathered around the table. The familiar clatter of cutlery and low hum of conversation felt heavier than usual, weighted with the anticipation of judgment I had learned to expect from them. My parents' eyes skimmed over me as if I were a shadow, my presence barely registering except as a reminder of past disappointments. My sister shot me a glance, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, and I immediately braced myself. I knew what was coming. From the moment I sat down, the remarks started. My father's voice, calm but cutting, mentioned my latest promotion in passing, then immediately dismissed it, comparing it to my brother's achievements in a way that made my chest tighten. My mother followed, highlighting my choice of a modest apartment and quietly suggesting that I wasn't ambitious enough. Each comment landed like a small, deliberate blow, reminding me of all the ways I had been overlooked, undervalued, and silently judged over the years. Between the quips about my career, subtle digs about my finances, and the pointed praise of my sister's new designer bag, I felt the familiar sting of favoritism. It was clear who had earned their attention and affection tonight, and it wasn't me. My hands rested tensely in my lap as I forced a smile, keeping my voice steady whenever I had to respond, though inside I was seething. Every slight, every condescending laugh at a story I shared, every glance that passed over me as if I were invisible, reminded me why I'd spent so long learning to survive in this household without expecting recognition. The room was warm, the candles flickering, but the atmosphere between us felt cold, sharp, and unwelcoming. It was a perfect storm of everything I'd quietly endured, a reminder that my family's eyes could never see my worth, at least not yet. And in that moment, as I held back the rising frustration and simmering resentment, I knew that tonight would mark another chapter in a long history of being underestimated. A chapter I would remember, and one day they would too. As I sat at the table, the familiar sting of their judgment pulled me back into memories I had tucked away for years. I remembered countless nights hunched over textbooks and reports, the dim light of my tiny apartment my only companion, while my siblings went out, carefree and adored. I thought of the weekend shifts I had worked, the overtime hours spent ensuring I could pay my bills without relying on anyone else, all while they assumed my successes were handed to me or insignificant. I recalled the times I had skipped family events to help a struggling colleague or friend, only to hear whispers about how I never prioritized family. My parents had never noticed the promotions I had earned through late nights and grueling projects, never praised the sacrifices I made just to stay afloat in a world that demanded more from me than it did from my siblings. I had quietly donated to causes my family mocked, supported friends in crises, and endured personal hardships without complaint. Yet here I was, sitting silently while they praised the superficial achievements of others. The contrast between my humility and their arrogance felt sharper than ever. It was as if all my invisible efforts existed only in my own mind, while their world revolved around appearances and favoritism. Even the smallest accomplishments, the ones that required courage and persistence, had been overlooked, dismissed, or met with backhanded compliments. Each memory stung, but it also strengthened the quiet fire building inside me, a reminder that my worth was never defined by their approval. While they reveled in status and recognition, I had been building resilience, character, and achievements they could never imagine. And as I took another bite, the taste bitter on my tongue, I realized that these sacrifices, though invisible to them, were the foundation of the power I was quietly gathering. My sister's voice cut through the dinner chatter like a knife, sharp and deliberate. "Honestly, I don't know why you even bother trying," she said, her words dripping with condescension. "It's not like anyone here takes your little accomplishments seriously." The entire table seemed to nod along, some faces painted with thinly veiled amusement, others pretending not to notice. My stomach churned, heat rushing to my cheeks, but I forced my lips into a polite smile. Inside, every nerve was ablaze. Years of overlooked effort, endless sacrifices, and quiet endurance boiled over into a surge of anger I could no longer contain. I counted each insult, each jab, committing them to memory as if I were cataloging evidence for a trial I would one day present. The smirk on her face, the subtle rolling of her eyes, the way my parents laughed at her quip, it all etched itself into my mind with painful clarity. For the first time that evening, I refused to let the comments slide, even if I had to mask the fury behind calm nods and measured replies. This moment crystallized something in me. Their dismissal would not define me forever. Every word, every sneer, every laugh would be remembered, stored, and used when the time came for them to understand exactly who they had underestimated. A quiet, simmering determination settled over me, replacing the familiar sting of humiliation with a burning anticipation. I wasn't just angry. I was calculating, aware that this dinner was only the beginning of a story in which I would reclaim my dignity and ensure they never forgot it. While the conversation at the dinner table continued, my mind drifted to the life they had never truly seen. I remembered the countless late nights in my apartment, hammering out reports that had earned me recognition in ways my family would never acknowledge. Promotions, accolades, and opportunities had come my way because of persistence, intellect, and a determination they had always assumed I lacked. My savings, carefully accumulated over years of discipline, allowed me a stability that my parents never understood. Luxuries and comforts I quietly afforded myself without boasting. Even my social circle reflected a life of respect and influence. Colleagues who relied on my guidance, mentors who valued my insights, friends who celebrated my successes with genuine admiration. None of this mattered to them, because they had only ever measured me against my siblings, ignoring the depth and breadth of my accomplishments. Subtle victories, speaking confidently in board meetings, negotiating contracts, mentoring others, investing wisely, were invisible in the world of family favoritism and superficial comparisons. And yet, each of these moments fortified my sense of self, reminding me that recognition from them was irrelevant to the reality of who I had become. The quiet power I held, the skills I had honed, and the life I had meticulously built were all invisible to the very people who thought they knew me. They had no idea that the nobody at the table had quietly constructed a world in which I was strong, capable, and untouchable by their judgment. I smiled to myself, a small, private acknowledgement of the distance between their perception and my truth, and felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that when the time came, the revelation would be undeniable. The conversation circled back to my sister, the golden child in my parents' eyes, and I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Every compliment, every polite nod, every laugh seemed reserved exclusively for her. They praised her designer dress, her newest promotion, her flawless taste, and the way she effortlessly navigated life as if born with everything handed to her. I sipped my water slowly, forcing a smile, while a wave of frustration surged inside me. I had worked harder, sacrificed more, and quietly built a life of real substance. Yet here she sat, basking in undeserved admiration. The comparison stung, and I felt the weight of being perpetually overlooked. The subtle sting of FOMO gnawed at me as I imagined what it would feel like to be the one celebrated, the one envied, the one spoken about with genuine respect. My mind raced with every example of favoritism, the invitations she received, the accolades she casually collected, the unquestioned attention from our parents. I thought about how they had ignored my achievements, how they seemed blind to my sacrifices, and the resentment that had built over the years coiled tighter inside me. Each passing comment from them about her successes felt like a small declaration of my insignificance in their eyes. And yet, even as anger bubbled, I reminded myself that their approval was no longer necessary. I had my life, my accomplishments, and my quiet victories, things they could never take away. Still, the desire to prove them wrong, to invert the hierarchy they had so casually constructed, lingered in my thoughts, setting the stage for a reckoning that I knew was coming. It was at a networking event for my company that I first realized how small the world really was, and how intertwined my life had become with the very circles my father moved in. I spotted him across the room, laughing with a group of colleagues I had secretly admired, completely unaware of the impact his dismissive attitude had had on me over the years. My mind immediately flashed back to weddings, charity galas, and corporate mixers where I had been overlooked, belittled, or treated like a shadow. At one fundraiser, I remembered standing quietly in a corner while my father bragged about my sister's accomplishments to strangers, barely acknowledging my presence. Another memory surfaced, a casual dinner with his colleagues where he dismissed my career success as not a big deal in front of an audience, laughing as if it were a joke. Each of these moments had stung, leaving me frustrated, invisible, and quietly fuming. And now, here I was, fully capable, confident, and respected in this very arena, and the irony wasn't lost on me. I watched my father move through the room, unaware that the nobody he'd spent decades dismissing was now someone whose opinion carried weight, whose achievements could not be ignored. The tension coiled inside me, a mix of satisfaction and anticipation, as I realized that one day, perhaps sooner than he expected, our worlds would collide in a way that would demand recognition, and not just polite acknowledgement, but a reckoning for every slight, every dismissive glance, every underestimation I had endured. After that dinner, I went home and sat alone, replaying every insult, every dismissive glance, every laugh that had been at my expense. The anger I felt wasn't reckless. It was focused, precise, and patient. I began mapping out how I could let them see who I had become without saying a word, how I could quietly reveal the depth of my achievements in a way that would leave them speechless. Small details mattered: the way I would arrive, the confidence I would carry, subtle hints of my financial independence and social influence, the unexpected stories I could casually mention that proved I had built a life far beyond their imagination. It wasn't about revenge in a cruel sense. It was about demonstration, about allowing reality to speak louder than their arrogance ever could. Each plan I considered, each calculated choice, strengthened my resolve. I envisioned the moments when their jaws would drop, when they would realize that the insignificant child they dismissed for so long had quietly amassed accomplishments they could never claim or understand. I smiled to myself, feeling the controlled thrill of anticipation. This was no hasty confrontation. It was a silent, inevitable revelation. They wouldn't see it coming, and that made it all the more satisfying. A few weeks later, an invitation arrived in the mail, penned in my mother's familiar handwriting. They wanted me at another family dinner, oblivious to the life I had quietly built. My first reaction was a mix of irritation and amusement. They were inviting me into the same room where I had been belittled, unaware that I was no longer the same person. I spent the days leading up to it planning, considering every detail, how I would carry myself, the subtle touches of status that would speak louder than words, the casual anecdotes that would hint at accomplishments they had never noticed. The anticipation was intoxicating, a quiet tension that coiled tighter with each passing hour. I imagined their faces, the moment recognition would dawn, and the shock that would ripple through the room as they realized how wrong they had been about me all these years. Every little gesture I planned, the confident posture, the calm, knowing smile, the understated hints of success, was a step toward a silent, satisfying reversal. I felt a thrill at the thought of sitting across from them again, not as the dismissed child, but as someone who had quietly earned their respect without begging for it. This dinner would be the perfect stage for subtle, yet undeniable vindication. I arrived at the house earlier than expected, letting the quiet hum of anticipation settle in my chest as I stepped out of the car. My posture was straight, deliberate, radiating a confidence I had carefully cultivated over the years. The outfit I had chosen was elegant but understated, a reflection of taste and success rather than flashy wealth. Yet the subtle designer accents and quality of my accessories whispered a quiet authority. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed the familiar faces at the doorway, expecting the timid, apologetic version of me they had long dismissed. Instead, they were met with someone entirely different, composed, self-assured, and undeniably in command of their presence. My handbag, a sleek, tasteful piece, and the small hints of luxury, like the key to my own car displayed discreetly, were intentional signals of a life they had never acknowledged. I caught my father's eye through the window, and for the first time, there was a flicker of recognition, a subtle shift in the way he saw me. Inside, the room felt the tension rise as I moved with effortless grace to the table, greeting relatives with measured smiles, each word chosen to convey warmth without weakness. My sister, once smug and untouchable, now glanced at me with uncertainty, a crack in her usual composure. Every step, every glance, every carefully controlled gesture was designed to contrast the dismissive, overlooked version of myself from years past. In that moment, I savored the quiet power of transformation. knowing that the most satisfying revelations are often silent, subtle, and impossible to ignore. Just as the conversation began to settle into its familiar rhythm, the door opened and my father's boss stepped in, a commanding presence that immediately shifted the energy in the room. I felt the subtle ripple of tension as my family straightened, voices faltering for a moment, their casual confidence disrupted. My father's usual smug demeanor flickered, replaced by a thin veneer of politeness that didn't quite mask his unease. I remained calm, quietly noting every reaction, the tight smiles, the nervous glances exchanged between my siblings, the way my mother's hand lingered on the table as if seeking reassurance. Each observation sharpened my focus, reminding me that this was the moment I had been anticipating, a chance for subtle vindication without needing to announce it outright. I greeted the boss with measured warmth, a confident smile and poised handshake that contrasted sharply with the stifled, awkward attempts at charm from my family. Their disorientation was palpable, and I allowed myself a small, private satisfaction in the knowledge that my presence alone disrupted the hierarchy they assumed was fixed. As the evening unfolded, I watched closely, listening to every exchange, timing my words and gestures, and preparing for the turning point that would quietly reveal the truth of who I had become. The conversation paused as my father's boss turned toward me, eyes locking with mine in a way that demanded attention. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, ma'am," he said, his tone formal, respectful, carrying a weight that neither my father nor anyone else in the room had ever afforded me. The words hit like a bell, resonating louder than any compliment I had ever received from my family. I felt a quiet thrill course through me as I acknowledged him with a composed nod, my smile calm yet satisfied. Around the table, the atmosphere shifted instantly. My sister froze mid-laugh, her smug expression replaced with disbelief. My parents exchanged a glance, a flicker of embarrassment crossing their features as they realized the extent of their oversight. The whispers and side glances that had accompanied every previous gathering were gone, replaced by stunned silence, punctuated only by the polite, measured conversation now directed at me. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted unmistakably. I noticed the way my father's jaw tightened, the way my mother's fingers fidgeted with the napkin, their previous certainty replaced by a dawning recognition. Every subtle detail, the respect in the boss's voice, the formality of his address, the careful attention now paid to my opinions, was a quiet triumph, a vindication of years of unacknowledged effort and resilience. I allowed myself to savor the moment, letting the realization wash over me. The invisible life I had built, the quiet successes, the sacrifices that had gone unnoticed, were finally acknowledged in a way my family could not ignore. And in that charged silence, I understood that this simple act of recognition had done more to restore my dignity than any words I could have spoken. I let the attention wash over me without a word of self-congratulation, keeping my composure while feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Every polite nod, every thoughtful glance from my father's boss, reminded me that I no longer needed validation from the people who had dismissed me for years. I watched my family shift uncomfortably in their seats, the smug certainty they had worn so easily now replaced with confusion and quiet embarrassment. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone outside the room. But to me, it was a delicious reversal. They had spent years underestimating me, and now, their assumptions were unraveling before their eyes. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the long nights, the sacrifices, the invisible victories that had quietly built the foundation for this moment. Each achievement, every careful decision, had compounded into a presence they could no longer ignore. And yet I did not gloat. My satisfaction was internal, calm, and unshakable, rooted in self-worth rather than arrogance. The quiet power of knowing my value, of witnessing recognition without demanding it, felt infinitely sweeter than any dramatic confrontation could have been. As I engaged in conversation, responding with measured humor and warmth, I could sense their surprise, the subtle guilt and admiration mingling with the discomfort I had long endured. In that room, I was fully myself, untouchable by their judgment, and for the first time in years, I felt complete satisfaction in my own growth, confident, empowered, and untethered from their perceptions. As the dinner continued, my mind drifted back to all the times I had been belittled, ignored, or dismissed in this very house. I remembered my father's casual remarks about my lack of ambition, my mother's quiet sighs of disappointment, my sister's mocking laughter echoing over the simplest accomplishments. Each memory had once stung sharply, leaving me questioning my worth, doubting myself, and longing for approval that never came. But now, juxtaposed against the respect and attention I was receiving from someone who truly recognized my achievements, those old insults felt distant, almost absurd in hindsight. I realized how much I had grown, how resilience had been forged in the fires of neglect, and how empathy had deepened through years of observing the flaws and limitations of those around me. The validation I had finally received from a credible source reinforced a truth I had long known, but seldom embraced fully. My value was inherent, built on effort, perseverance, and character, not measured by their shallow judgments or favoritism. In that quiet moment of reflection, I felt a profound sense of closure. I no longer needed their recognition to define me. I had earned my own respect, cultivated my own dignity, and discovered the power of self-validation. The past no longer held sway over me. I could acknowledge it, learn from it, and move forward with the calm confidence that comes from knowing my worth is undeniable. The evening wound down, and while the tension in the room had softened, I knew the family dynamics hadn't magically changed. My parents still carried their old habits. My sister still had her pride, and the subtle hierarchy they cherished remained intact in many ways. Yet, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of empowerment rooted not in changing them, but in claiming my own worth. I had witnessed the shift, subtle though it was, and it confirmed that recognition and respect could not be forced but earned through resilience, skill, and self-belief. Sitting there, quietly savoring the aftermath, I realized that justice doesn't always need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it arrives in the calm certainty that you are finally seen for who you truly are. I reflected on the journey, the years of patience, the invisible victories, the careful cultivation of my life that had finally intersected with the moment of acknowledgement. There was satisfaction in knowing that I had maintained grace, allowed their assumptions to crumble, and demonstrated my value without resorting to confrontation or anger. It was a bittersweet victory. They hadn't changed completely, but I had, and that was enough. The story of their favoritism and dismissal would linger, but it no longer defined me. In that quiet, self-assured moment, I understood the profound power of self-validation, the sweet taste of vindication tempered with empathy, and the lasting strength of recognizing one's own worth before anyone else does.